Hey everybody, I'm Caleb Arnold, also known as C-Leb from the band C-Leb and the Kettle Black, and co-founder of Gigaton. Today we're going to talk about a setup that I have going, which is the MPC to the Morningstar MC6 and also to the Midi Commander. There are reasons that I have these foot pedals plugged into the MPC. I'll probably get into why I have this set up this way in later videos, but wanted to explain my setup. That way, if there are things that I'm doing that other people can learn from, you can take it from that. Let me demo how this works first. I'll start with a MIDI commander. If we page up here, you'll notice we're on sequence 1. We page in sequences of 5. That's because 1 represents A, 2 represents B, 3 represents C, and 4 represents D. And when we want to go to 5, we page up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, page up 5. And you can also page back down, and that takes you back down to 1. So these work in series of 5, and that this represents 1, 2, 3, 4 down at the bottom through A through D here. It's a little bit confusing. Don't be confused with the fact that 1 through 4 on the top do not work at all. The reason being is these are only control changes at the top, and these are program changes at the bottom. Since these are PC changes, these will operate with the MPC, and the top ones will not, at least not in a way that I can get them to function. This is actually fairly simple. Let me just show kind of how this works. I'm going to start the song, and then of course you can see this sequence running. We're going to go to sequence 7 by C. Now there we go. And we're going to go back to 7. Here's another one that's going to come in. Another sequence we have, right? And when we want to go back to B, that's going to be take us back to 6. Correlates to 6. Great. What we can't do in this particular scenario while we're controlling sequences is we cannot start and stop without actually manually touching the transport. Let's be really clear about this. The sequences that you see controlled through the MIDI Commander PC commands are happening mainly because of our MIDI sync settings that have all the way at the bottom program change set to sequence. So if we look at this, we can set it to sequence, track, program, or off. We have it set to sequence. So currently, whenever we make changes in our sequence environment here, it will change the sequence. That's great. I'll show how I set this up inside of the MIDI commander here in a second. What's important to realize is that I cannot control the transport, which is critical to start, stop, and playability for a live setting. So for instance, I may want to start the song, stop, a fill come in with the guitar, back on the 1. It also might be helpful at some points to be able to start the song, stop the song, and play from where it picked up. Both of those things are options that I would like to be able to utilize, but not have to use my hands in a live setting. The MC6 does allow me to do this because it is able to send not only MMC, PC, and CC, but it sends SysEx messages. And so we're going to get into that later. But essentially the reason that these two are so different is because this controls the sequences through the MIDI commands, and this controls the transport, right? So if we want to play start, we can do that from here, but I'm controlling mainly the transport functions through here. I can sequence up and sequence down. You can see those set up here. So we can use these as sequence up, sequence down, but they aren't mapped in a series of 5 like the page up, page down is done here. Okay. To see how this might work in a demo, this is what's happening. Play start, stop, play start, stop, play from stop, stop, play from stop, stop, play from start, next sequence. We'll let that roll out. We'll go back to the previous sequence. And if we were to stop and hit this reset button here, it would reset and take us back to 0 for the starting place. Essentially, our play start is doing a reset and a play at the same time. It's combining these two commands into one command for just this one. We'll get into that later whenever I'm explaining how the Morningstar application programs this pedal, which is, I think, probably the easiest way to do it and still very complex at the same time. So now that you've seen kind of how this demo works, let's get into the nuts and bolts. Let's talk a little bit about how these are plugged in. The Midi Commander here is a very customizable, programmable MIDI interface. It comes with the USB, also a MIDI out. You also can use expression pedals with this particular pedal. Very customizable. How you wind up customizing this is if you turn the Midi Commander off and then you hold down the set button on the far right and turn it back on. It will allow you to choose which custom environment you want. There's a custom 1 and a custom 2. There's only 2 different banks that you'd be able to choose from. If you want to flip back and forth between those, I believe that's the 3 button up here. So now we're in custom 1 and then this is custom 2. Custom 2 is where I have everything set up. When we get into the Midi Commander, there's lots of customizable settings in here, but as we scroll down, you can see that the key 1 is actually referring to this. Key 2 is referring to this. 3, 4, and then if we keep scrolling down, we'll get into mod A, B, C, and D. This is the default setting on the custom 1. You can see that, for instance, A, B, C, and D, this one is set on PC to 58. Let's go over to our second customizable setting that we have here, which is the one that we're using. I'm going to scroll down to A, and you can see that A is actually on 102. So just so that we can see how I have the Midi Commander set up and the customizable settings for running the MPC in the sequences that I explained earlier, which is a page up, page down by 5, and those correlating to a 1, 2, 3, 4 in each one of the page environments. Whenever you go inside to program A through D in the Midi Commander using the PC changes, 102, 103, 104, and 105. That's how I have this set up. All you have to do if you want anything to save is turn off the Midi Commander, turn it back on, and if you hold down D, it will show up to 2. If you hold down C, it will show up to 1. We're automatically in 2 by default. Let's go ahead and page back to sequence 1, and let's talk about the MC6. Inside of our preferences, you can see that we have our MIDI sync in our MPC set up for both our Midi Commander to do a global control, but also our MC6 is a global control. I'm only using MIDI 1 in this particular environment. I'm not using 2 through 4, so I don't have those set up. The MPC 2 MIDI DIN input on the back of this also can be ran from the MC6. So for instance, while I'm programming this, sometimes I will plug this into the computer and this into the MPC to test changes. That doesn't always work. There are changes that the USB can send that don't seem to sync quite as well using MIDI DIN, but in this particular environment, you can do both if you wanted to. I currently only have USB-C set up, and that is plugged in directly to the back of the MPC using USB 3. Okay, now that we've taken a look at how these two function and how this can function with the MPC, let's get into how we need to program this so that it will effectively change the transport controls. Specifically, again, we're talking about the transport controls on the MPC using our MC6. So we will dive into that next. Okay, now that we have gone through how we have it set up with our MPC, let's now talk a little bit about how to connect and program this inside of the Morningstar engineering editor. So first thing we do is we have this plugged in via USB. It has already picked up on our MC6 Pro port here, so we're going to hit connect. This allows us to connect to it. This immediately becomes a little bit daunting. Admittedly, it was difficult for me to figure out how to make this work without a whole bunch of YouTube videos and online reading. Let me just do a really quick explanation. of what's going on here. In our edit preset, which you have all these tabs up here at the top, we're going to focus on the edit preset. I've created our first bank here. Each one of these banks can then have any of these presets. So we then have all of these commands that we can send through any one of these banks. How we edit these presets over here is through this interior section of the application environment, which controls our pedal and programs our pedal. So in this particular instance, our previous sequence, which is allotted to our A button down here at the bottom, our previous sequence, we name it here. I change the color of it here and also the text color. And then we actually create the preset messages that it's going to send. So in this particular case, in the previous sequence on press, which you can have all of these other options that you can select from, but on press, the PC number is going to decrease and send on the counter, decrease counter by 1 and send PC message, and we want the wraparound set to yes. So in this particular case, what we're doing is we're saying decrement the sequence setting or this particular counter setting by 1, and it knows to do that. So that's for previous sequence in button A. Now if we go to play start, I have two commands going, and I've renamed it play start. So that's this middle button here, and the background's green, the text is white. And now I have two commands going on, and these are SysEx commands. And these particular commands are different than the one we had before, specifically because we're trying to control the transport. When we program these SysEx commands, you can see this first number here represents the length of the total. So 11 is the length, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It stops here. Everything else is 0, I realize that, but it's only going to recognize up to 11, which in this case is 12, since the length actually takes up the first number of 1. It seems a little confusing, but I just know that past 12, it doesn't do anything. What this does is this first command tells on press, set the play to 0. So when we hit play start, when we hit press, the first thing that happens is this sets it to 0. The second thing that happens is it hits play. So now we have a second set of commands that happen here. These are only 4 long, so 1, 2, 3, 4 stops here. The fifth one then is no longer a command that it recognizes, but this tells it to play. This command that we see here is the same as this one. So the play start, all this is doing, telling it to do on the second command is to play. That's all this command is doing, is going to play. When we want to do the reset, that's this command. So this command on the very first one is technically this one when we're resetting it, right? So all I did was separate out these two commands into two different buttons in order to be able to kind of give a variable in those features. Let's keep going. Our next sequence is just the polar opposite of our previous sequence. So when we've gone down here, instead of decrease and send, we're increasing and sending. On our reset, we already talked about that. That is just the first function of the play start. For stop, this is slightly different. This is a MIDI MMC command, and 127 actually sends the command to all of them. So we look at through all of these. There's a whole bunch of commands we can be very specific about. This one sends it to all of them, and we're telling it to stop. I'm not using a SysEx command for this particular feature. And in the end, the play stop, all I'm doing is telling it to play from where it stopped. So that is the second command in our play start. It just plays. So it doesn't reset to 0. It just plays from wherever we stopped it at. And those commands for the stop, if you look here, press on the SysEx, again, 4, 127, 127, 6, and 2, and then it doesn't read anything past that. One other thing I forgot to mention, we were talking about these SysEx files in specific. For whatever reason, Akai changed the ability for the MPC to read SysEx files past version 2.13. So if we go into preferences here, you'll see that my firmware is at 2.13, and that is where I am stuck at currently using the Morningstar MC6 pedal, because MPC and Akai no longer accept the SysEx commands. If you're looking for features or updates from a version that is newer, that's probably not going to come from here, because for whatever reason Akai is kicking themselves for not already having created one of these, but now trying to prevent other folks from being able to utilize this as a functional live event tool, which is what I'm trying to do. So I thought that was important for folks to remember. Look, I'm using 2.13 and I'm stuck here for the time being.